Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and we have had a very busy week in North Dakota politics. A lot going on with the North Dakota Republican Party, which is, I mean, there's no getting around the fact that the NDGOP is the dominant political entity in North Dakota. Now, there's a couple of ways to perceive that. On one hand, it's dominant because Republicans hold every statewide elected office, massive majorities in the state legislature. But also, you've got to remember, a lot of times those people who get elected to statewide office, I mean, they're pretty independent. It's not like the party, although some people think it should work this way, it's not like the party sends out directives on how all Republicans, should be behaving or should be voting on issues, et cetera, et cetera. Although, again, some people who have taken charge of the party seem to think that's the way it should work. Anyway, the drama recently has been a turmoil in the leadership of the party. There's been a lot going on. The most recent is the party hired an executive director for about a week. He's out of South Dakota. His name was Dave Roetman. He had a whole pile of ugly social media posts. He was completely unapologetic about it. In fact, mocking people with Twitter posts, who were even suggesting that these things were inappropriate. He's now been let go by the party. But I think some questions remain about how did he get hired in the first place? What was that vetting looking like? Who are the people who are in charge of the party who thought that hiring somebody like this was a good idea in the first place? Ben Hansen, of course, is my co-host on Wednesdays. Joining us also is Levi Bachmeier, who is one of the NDGOP's many district chairs who also they have seats on what's called the state committee, which essentially the state committee makes the decisions for the party. Levi, how are you?
I'm good, Rob. Thanks for having me.
I tactically did not mention which district you're in because I forgot which district you're in, and I didn't
That's
have
okay.
it in front of me.
Anytime I can celebrate West Fargo, I'm happy to do so. So greetings from District 13.
District 13.
Northern West Fargo.
In beautiful West Fargo.
Beautiful West Fargo.
You wrote a letter to the editor. I was doing some reporting. You also wrote a letter to the editor prior to Mr. Roetman ultimately resigning, basically saying, welcome to North Dakota. We expect better from you from this. I think one of your lines was, I expect better from, the high school athletes that I coach than what we're getting from you, an adult man. Tell us a little bit. What was your reaction, I guess, when you first saw that Mr. Roetman was going to be the executive director of the party?
Yeah, I didn't know much about him. The party had sent out some communications about his hiring. I think your questions about process and vetting, I won't be able to answer. I wasn't a part of that conversation, and I think that's probably some fair questions to ask of the folks who were involved in that process. But I read your reporting and was just pretty troubled by what I saw, both in terms of the content and the response. And I think some folks know that I used to work in the governor's office, and Governor Burgum's often says talk to people, not about people. And so I sent Dave an email and just said, hey, I would really like to connect because I'm in a competitive district. We've sent Republicans to the legislature for a while. Senator Kramer did not win our district in 2018. And so as competitive goes in North Dakota, I would say we are, one of those suburban districts that gets talked about a lot at the national level, which will determine the direction of a lot of our national politics. So it really didn't sit well with me. So I sent him an email and just said, hey, your job at the end of the day is to help these districts be successful, and you're only making my job harder. I heard more from members of my district about your reporting than almost any other topic in the years that I've been chair dating back to 2021. And so while I also wanted to talk to Mr. Roetman, that seems a little unnecessary now. I also, felt an obligation to ensure that, members of my district community understand that we sort of expect more of our leadership. And so trying to do a both and, always wanting to understand more. I think your reporting made it pretty clear how he felt. But one of the things I love about North Dakota is you're generally only a phone call away, whether it's your Congressman Armstrong, the governor, or your neighbor down the street. And so wanting to try to accomplish both of those things, help me understand. But at the same time, like you said, my favorite thing to do on earth is to coach track and field. I'm the pole vault coach at West Fargo High School. It is my favorite thing to do. And we talk a lot about character. We give out a weekly award, which has nothing to do with performance. It all has to do, were you a good teammate? Were you encouraging, the folks around you? Were you pushing yourself to be a better person? Values that will last them much longer than their time as a pole vaulter, because as a former pole vaulter myself, once you graduate high school or college, there's not a lot of opportunities to do so. But being a decent human, working hard, being a teammate, those are skills that last your entire life. So it just felt like I would be a hypocrite myself if I would consistently preach those values to the young people that I have the privilege of coaching, but then not say something to a guy who essentially works for me as one of the leaders of the state committee. It just didn't feel right.
Well, and while I, unfortunately, my sloth-like reflexes and pencil-thin arms wouldn't do well on your athletic field, I do appreciate your values, Levi, and I wanted to mention you as a district chair for a legislative district said you'd gotten a lot of outreach from your, constituents, as it were, but active Republicans in your district. Let's call them that. I think that's fair to say. And was the overall tenor negative towards Mr. and I'm forgetting how to pronounce his last name. I apologize.
Yes. From calls to resign, I think I was CC'd on my first ever message from one of our district Republicans directly to the state party chair because they were so frustrated. They wanted to make sure that she heard that directly from the rank and file. I think some people may think, he was just trying to score political points. I think if you ask our chair, she would have to confirm that that's not true. People were upset about this, and it ranged the spectrum from just how can this be to this guy's got to go. I tried to land somewhere in the middle. I said, I work in the education industry. People should always have a chance to do better. I think cancel culture has gone out of control. But I think Rob's reporting also made it pretty clear that there wasn't a lot of interest in doing better either. So I'm certainly not disappointed with the outcome, but yes, I think the short answer to your question is overwhelmingly upset, and that took, I think, many different types of frustration.
One thing that concerns me is the perception. I look at North Dakota Republicans, and there's been a good run, and it continues. I don't know that it's going to stop anytime soon, but it's been 30 plus years. Starting with leaders like former Governor Ed Schaefer, going to John Hoeven, Jack Dalrymple. Those are just the governors. There's so many people, I can't enumerate them all here, who have contributed to, I think, a very pragmatic, very positive approach to leadership and public service. And again, I think a lot of that has its roots in Ed Schaefer. And I look now, and I'm very worried that the Republican brand is gonna be tarnished. Now, I think what happened with the recently departed executive director is, a symptom of a larger problem where there doesn't seem to be a lot of concern about dignity. And listen, politics has always been a tough business. There's always been some sharp elbows thrown and stuff like that. I'm not Pollyannish about that. But I feel like we've been crossing lines in recent years. And I think a lot of it started up at the national level, but it's certainly trickled down to local politics. As somebody who's involved in politics, Levi, involved in government, does that worry you? Because it really worries me that we're losing something in all of this.
Yeah, our politics are weird now. There is no doubt about it. And I think kind of to your point, you made some comments about directives. in terms of what are the goals of what should be the goals of the state party. I think we're in a place now where there are some folks who view roles like mine as district chairs, zero, name recognition in your own legislative district, really shouldn't be trying to set the agenda for what happens in Bismarck. I view our responsibilities as process. How do we get people engaged? And how do we make sure that our candidates reflect the will of our voters? I think we have a growing attitude among some in the party who realize that there are levers and games and tools that can be used to try to potentially move the agenda in a particular way. And I think if we stray from what our fundamental purpose is, and that's why, when I hear discussions about trying to further legitimize the convention, which to me means delegitimizing the primary, which is where your everyday North Dakotans go to make their voices heard, I get really concerned. And so I think you're right. I do share that concern. I think in our politics right now, Jonah Goldberg is one of my favorite conservative columnists. And, he talks a lot about, our politics being driven by anger.
I feel attacked by that comment, but all right.
Yeah. National.
Okay.
You're number one at the state level.
All right. No.
I was inciting riots.
Are you for hope or are you driven by hope or are you driven by anger? And I think there's definitely both. And I want to be a guy that's driven by process, that makes sure that's the perspective of the voters, the everyday folks that I see at high school football games who are worried about inflation, who are worried about, their kids' futures, that those are the things that we're talking about, and that I don't try to leverage my position to pass resolutions or create a scorecard that can be tried to use to primary, our lawmakers in Bismarck. So I think you're right. It's concerning, but I think people who love this state, and I'm very proud, to count myself as one of those folks, need to stay involved and keep our eye on the prize, which is supporting a system that ensures that our elected officials represent the will of the voters.
It's so funny, Levi, because you and I live in the Red River Valley, and as I'm sure you're a politically astute person, I'm sure you're aware, those conversations the North Dakota GOP are having are the same ones the DFL in Minnesota have been having for the last 3 year cycles or so, about the respect for the convention versus what the results of the primary are. And their last 2 governors were picked by the primary against the wishes of their party convention. And it's just the parallels, despite the complete antithesis of political philosophy, it's just an interesting thing to observe. I had a 2-part question for you. It's really kind of not fair, but it is to speculate. You didn't hire this person, and you made very clear that someone with the results that you got, you wouldn't have hired if this decision had solely been left up to you, and it wasn't up to you at all. But as a legislative chair for the North Dakota GOP, and as someone who sits on is it the executive committee board?
State committee board, rather. Sorry. Rob has brought up process, and if I were in your shoes with your political resume, I would wonder, and I'm wondering if there has been talk or if there will be talk in the future, what are your statewide officials, and in particular your federal delegation and the governor's input or say on who gets hired by the executive committee in the GOP? And if I were in your shoes, my 2 cents would be, you are someone who worked for the current governor, and I can't imagine him in the private sector hiring somebody with, a cursory social media search would have probably told him he probably wouldn't have hired him as an intern. So when you're the governor and it makes you a figurehead of your party, is there some steering or direction or any talk or any push? Will there be a push on your part to make them part and parcel of the hiring process for something so basic, but also important? There's not a lot of staffers to political parties. The executive director is kind of it. And so it would seem to me like this is a big deal. But to me, it feels like there was no involvement on their behalf, despite the fact that this person would be speaking for them. So do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? Do you have a direction you're going to be pushing for in the future? Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree. I mean, I don't think it'll surprise anyone that I'm a huge fan of Governor Burgum, both in North Dakota politics and national politics. And so I think anytime he has an opportunity to put his business acumen, to work for the benefit of citizens, whether that's at the policy level or at the political level, I think that's generally a good thing. North Dakota has, I think one of the best kept secrets is the amount of power that the governor's office has. It's actually not that much. But I think Governor Burgum relishes that opportunity, to lead through persuasion, to lead through vision about what the future of North Dakota can look like. And so, yeah, I would certainly hope that the executive, committee would be a little bit more intentional about including, our leadership. And that isn't just the governor's office. That's the senators, that's Representative Armstrong. In
yes, and that's what I was referring to.
Yeah,
and Levi, I do have to say though, it's set up as a weak governorship. No commentary on Doug Burgum, Jack Dalrymple, Bud Sinner for that matter. That's how it's set up in the state's constitution. Probably a good idea for a rural state. But when you're the governor, you're your figurehead of your party.
Yes.
And is there representation currently that for the governor, for the solo congressional seat for the two senators on the executive committee that is allowed to vote on things like an executive director hire at the North Dakota GOP?
Yeah, that's a great question. I won't be able to answer that in its entirety, Ben. I do know for I think FEC federal reasons, all of the federal delegation has ex officio representation on the executive committee. The governor's office actually has a voting seat on the executive committee. So in terms of an opportunity for participation, I know that's there. I don't know how broadly engaged the full executive committee was. I can tell you that the full state committee certainly wasn't. So I would be speculating to guess to the extent, that folks from those offices were involved. But, moving forward, I think the question is, was there awareness of this social media activity and then just some sort of tacit comfort with it? Or was there just not the due diligence? And I'm not sure which one's more concerning, but I just, in the spirit of moving forward and doing better, I hope that that's a serious conversation. And I don't think that any single elected official should have total control of anything. So I don't think the governor alone should be able to, select the executive director. I think a high level of deference, is due as the leader of the party. But I think to your point, I think North Dakota has worked well for a long time because we distribute power down to the most local level as well as any state in the country. So I think there has to be a balance, but I certainly hope the process, I'm a big process guy. I hope the process is better when selecting the next executive director and that it represents, I think, the attitudes of the state committee holistically and not just, a certain faction.
I can tell you when I spoke to very briefly, she didn't have a lot to say to me about it, but Chair Sanford, she said that they weren't aware of these. I also saw that she said made comments to the Associated Press that these posts were kind of buried, which I have to dispute. They were not. They were anybody who knows how to use Twitter, they were right out in the open. This was not hard to find. So my feeling is they either didn't look or when they looked, they weren't bothered by what they saw. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. You alluded, and I think this is one of the big bone of contentions within the North Dakota Republican Party right now is what is the role of the party? And I think we can all agree that political parties exist to kind of organize people around a set of ideas. I don't think there's any question about that. What really worries me is that there is a push towards, and again, you alluded to this, Levi, a push towards, the party being able to sort of enforce discipline on its candidates or on its elected officials, where, the party, sort of expects loyalty to the party and its platform or whatever, even though the platform could be interpreted a lot of different ways. So I know there's efforts out there to push this. What do you make of those, Levi, in terms of like the things that are going on? I don't know. I mean, I look at it, and I've made this comparison before, where it's kind of, you look at a place like China, where the party, right, the Communist Party is kind of what's in charge, and people who serve in various public capacities are expected to be loyal to the party. You're expected to be a party member, even if you're like just a prominent business person. You're expected to be a member of the party and loyal to the party. I don't want that in American politics. I think that's antithetical to the American tradition of politics, but it seems to be what some in the North Dakota Republican Party want. I'm not calling them communists. I'm just saying they seem to want party loyalty over are elected officials serving their constituents. Do you see that as well, or am I just off the map here?
No, I mean, I think, and again, this isn't true. There are tons and tons of honorable folks, who serve on the state committee for no reason other than wanting to serve their constituents.
Agreed.
And get serious, sober-minded folks elected to create good public policy. I do think largely you're right. I think though that the party rather is a means to an end, and that may be positions that aren't necessarily as popular with the electorate generally. But due to strong convictions, people have realized that if you understand how the game's played, and you set things up you set the chess pieces up in the right way, you have a better chance of getting the outcome that you seek. So perfect example, a lot of these folks are deep disciples of former Representative Becker, and he ran against Senator Hoeven. So I don't know that it's so much party loyalty, because if it was all about the party, those folks would have jumped ship the minute Senator Hoeven won the convention. They would have gone after Representative Becker for challenging him, because kind of under your example, the party is supreme. And I don't think that at all. I think certain folks are driven by a very specific agenda, and see the party as one of the most efficient means to achieving their agenda, to create the society that they want to see. And then the party is a means to an end. If Representative Becker, in his bid to take on one of our most successful and popular U.S. senators, if that's the best path that they see for their vision of the future, well, then forget the party. I mean, one of the things that didn't get covered, I think you may have mentioned it, was there was a rule change proposed at the most recent state committee to undo the prohibition on seeking the Republican nomination if you ran as a member of another party or an independent within the last 6 years. And I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think people, their loyalty isn't to the brand itself, but rather what they think the party apparatus can be used for as a means to an end.
Ben Hansen had to drop off, so if you don't hear his voice again, that's why. We didn't do anything to him. And I'm not just crowding him out. We just got a few minutes left with Levi. I think you make a really good point. And talking about Rick Becker, I mean, that's another thing that concerns me is there seems to be a gap when I look at the last state convention where Rick Becker almost came close to defeating Senator Hoeven at a convention that was packed, by delegates that were kind of from this local political process that frankly very few people relative to the larger electorate actually participate in. They did a very good job of organizing their people and getting their people out to the state convention, and they almost beat John Hoeven. Rick Becker then ran in the general election, and he couldn't beat Katrina Christensen, which, all due respect to Katrina Christensen, she was the Senate candidate for our Democratic friends, was not a strong candidate. And we all know that Democrats struggle even with strong candidates to get a lot of traction. Becker couldn't beat her. So I worry that there's a growing disconnect between the sentiments and priorities of the people who are most active in the North Dakota Republican Party. Not all of them, but certainly at this point a controlling faction of them. There's a disconnect between them and where the larger electorate is. Do you agree?
I agree wholeheartedly. And that's why the hair on the back of my neck stands up anytime I hear proposed rule changes or discussions of further expanding or legitimizing or promoting the convention, because the subtext there is we realize that we have a better shot at victory. And I think this most recent cycle couldn't be, to lay it out in clearer terms, Senator Hoeven, an incredible public servant, a good and decent man. I interned him for him in college. Great guy. Almost lost to Representative Becker, and tons of energy was put in to help him win at the convention. It is not a question in the minds of North Dakotans who is better equipped to serve them in the United States Senate, Representative Becker or Senator Hoeven. And so my worry is people realize that this has an opportunity to distort what voters want by using some of the mechanics of the party to create this illusion that Representative Becker has widespread appeal across North Dakota. And he's certainly well liked by many vocal, loud folks that you may see on Facebook a lot. But I think, as you said, he couldn't get more votes than a Democrat when the rubber hit the road and, voters hit the election booths. So I think we have to be really careful. And for people like me and others, sometimes get asked, like, partisan politics is insane right now. Why do you want to be involved? And I think the reason is we need people involved who aren't there to forward a specific agenda, but are passionate about institutions, who are passionate about process, who are passionate about the folks who are raising kids and bringing them to hockey practice at 7 p.m. on a Sunday night, and don't have time to go sit in an auditorium for 6 hours where people are utilizing tactics to just shout each other down and delay the process as long as possible. So reasonable people go home.
I remember during the last cycle, Senator Jessica Unruh was facing a challenge at her District 33, was facing a challenge from kind of a populist person, and that was one of their they held their district convention. I think it was it was a weeknight. I think it was a Wednesday night, and it was all point of order. It goes to 2 a.m. And I remember Senator Unruh telling me, my people left. She says, a lot of my people left because they had jobs. Their kids was with babysitters, and they can't have their babysitters watching their kids until 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. When they got work and school and everything the next morning. So, I mean, it's really unfortunate that I want a competitive process. I mean, I don't want people to be listening to this conversation and say, well, these guys don't want any competition. They just
not at all.
That's not it at all. But I want a process that's rooted in reality. And I want a process that produces candidates that are in touch with political realities in North Dakota. And in some of our parts of the state, I don't think we have it. And I think what's masking a lot of this is a lot of North Dakotans have come to trust the Republican brand. And when they see that R next to a candidate who maybe they don't know a lot else about, they're going to vote for that person. Because the Republican brand is very powerful for a lot of excellent reasons and a lot of good leadership in the past. And I think when we're talking about folks trying to, taking over the North Dakota Republican Party, I think a lot of it is getting control of that brand and getting control of deciding who gets to have that R next to their name, even if that person is not necessarily in line with what made that brand so great and so powerful in North Dakota.
Yep. And as district chairs, I think our view, to your point, is to ensure fair, open, and honest competition that ultimately reflects the will of voters, not trying to push our own personal political agenda to create a cudgel to be used against folks in the primary. And the last piece on that, is for folks who have concerns about the primary, and say that Democrats influence that so much. I haven't once heard a call yet for voter registration, which is not something that I support, but it's sort of interesting. I mean, that would solve their problem. And similarly, if that was all true, the Democrat wouldn't have gotten more votes than Representative Becker this last election. So I don't find those arguments compelling. And so we need to make sure that we have an open process for good, rigorous debate that respects the will of our voters, not insiders who feel very strongly and are willing to just dedicate the time.
I thought it was very interesting last cycle that Representative Becker skipped the June primary vote. I thought that I think if he runs in the general, he could say, "Oh, I had to run as an independent. I didn't have the R next to my name, so people weren't going to vote for me." I think that if he had run in the June primary, he doesn't have any excuses. I think he would have gotten a not good vote total against John Hoeven, and he would have been out of excuses for it. So anyway, well, I appreciate you coming on so much and talking about this stuff. I do think it's really important, to sort of protect the Republican. I guess it's not my position my interest in all this is I want the parties to be grounded in reality. And frankly, I mean, we could have a whole show about the struggles that the Democratic MPL has and how, in many ways, their party is not grounded in reality either. But right now,
the hell you say?
Yeah. Okay. Ben joined back in. We could have a whole conversation about that, but the North Dakota Republican Party is the dominant party in North Dakota, and these things that are happening in the party, they are important. And I think also, Levi, I think you would agree with this. we need to encourage people to get back out and get involved in their local districts again. I know it's a big time commitment. I know it can be frustrating, but I think it's important to engage in this process again so that it does better reflect what North Dakotans want in elected office.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got a both and to that. I think, yes, the short answer, but I think at the same time, we need to make sure that our rules and institutions are set up so regardless of your amount of free time, if you're trying to start a business or raise a family, that you don't have a disadvantage or that your relative voice in our political discussion is smaller. Because ultimately, if we're not careful about how the rules are set up, the old adage, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. That's the road that we're headed down. So yes, people need to get involved, but we also need to make sure that our systems don't disadvantage people who are busy doing the things that make North Dakota great, which is raising their kids, working hard, and living in their community.
Yeah. No, I don't want to get rid of the June primary. That's not what I'm saying.
I had not heard that adage before, but it is a good one, and it could be very applicable to both major parties in North Dakota right now.
Well, we're gonna put a pin in it. A very weird show where the co-host disappeared for like 15 minutes, and then
you didn't have to call it out for folks. It's an audio medium.
Well, I had to call it out when you left, and people thought it was gonna be a loudmouth sucking up all the time. You left and you came back, Ben.
Would they have noticed the difference though?
Probably not. Yeah. I like that you're owning your own contributions to this show. That's great. Yeah. Nobody noticed when you were gone, Ben. Good job.
Levi, thanks for being on with Statler and Waldorf today from the Muppet Show.
All right. We're going to stop it here because things are starting to get weird. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again.
Thanks for having me.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.